Welcome to the Dalek Diaries, episode 3, which is looking at the assembly of the new series Dalek gunner arm. I've assembled all the parts we need for this. Firstly, we have a piece of 25mm aluminium tube which forms the barrel of the gun. In this case, for the pivot for the gun, we've used a 10cm garden glazing globe. These are available from a lot of garden supply shops. Reasonably cheap, around $10 mark. I then had 25mm holes drilled in it by a friend. Shout out to Michael, thanks very much. For the pipe to go through. I didn't ease the holes with sandpaper quite as much as I probably should have, and so once I got the pipe through that far, I was unable to get it through any further, and I didn't want to damage the ball, which is quite thin, by trying to bang it out or anything. So what I've done is I've cut a piece of smaller diameter pipe which will go in from the inside. This side is the side that's inside the Dalek, which will form the handle so that the gun can be manoeuvred. And once everything's done, that piece of pipe will either be glued or screwed and fixed in there. Still works just as effectively. However, if you ease the holes a little bit more, you can actually get the one piece of 25mm pipe through enough that it forms the handle as well. Also, second mistake I made when I was cutting this was I measured off the plans, but obviously somewhere along the line the measurements were slightly off, and once I placed the gun bevels on and placed the rods in place to get the spacing, I found out that the bevel was right at the end of the gun, and there's actually supposed to be a centimetre of the barrel stick out the other side of the boss. So what I've done very simply is I've just cut an extra piece of pipe, and that will go inside the bevel and will be glued in place, so you'd be none the wiser once it's done that it's not part of the same pipe. However, tip to other people when they're cutting, measure twice, cut once, get your measurement right, then you don't need to worry about the extra add-on. So the next job we've got to do before we look at putting it all together is paint the glazing globe. I love the shiny chrome, it would be nice to leave it shiny in chrome, however the NSD ball joints are black. So a can of rust guard epoxy enamel, because it's fairly heavy duty, or it's reported to be fairly heavy duty. This gets a bit of wear because it goes in the gun box and it moves around, so there's a bit of friction. Normally line the gun box with felt or something like that to stop the paint rubbing off, but over the time there will be a bit of wear, so having a reasonably heavy duty paint that will stand up to a little bit of that wear and having a glossy finish so that it's smooth and will move easily is a good idea. So all we're going to do is tape up the barrel. I put the barrel in first before I painted the ball, because it's just going to make it easier when I'm spraying it to be able to hold the barrel while I spray the ball. If I didn't have the barrel through there, it'd be quite fiddly to try to turn the ball around and position it. So all I'm going to do is cover the barrel with masking tape to make sure we don't get any black paint on it. After I cut the barrel, it's been polished with steel wool to get a bit of shine on it. You can spend, forever polishing and polishing. I'm happy with the finish I've got at this stage. If you look really closely, there's a few little scratch marks, but from a sort of 2-foot distance it looks good, which is my general rule. So tape up enough of the barrel. And I'll spray paint that. I'll probably put a coat of primer on it first, and then I'll spray paint it with the gloss black. I'm not going to bother taping this end because that's going to be on the inside of the Dalek. It's not going to matter if that bit of piping is black. If you had a longer piece you could tape that side as well, up to personal preference. Before I start, I'm just going to give the ball a very light rub over with a bit of emery paper. This is just to help key the surface for the paint to grip better. And then I'm going to start off with some primer. I'll put a coat of primer on, and then I'll move to the black. Okay, so firstly I'm just going to spray it with primer. It's a very light coat. So I get a nice consistent coverage without any runs. Any runs or any imperfections, once it's dry I can give them a light sand before I put on a black coat. So looking at the rods for the Dalek gun arm, in this case I'm using 5mm knitting needles. This particular brand is called Birchcraft, available from Spotlight in Australia, and they cost about $5 for a packet of 2. They're solid aluminium. You need to be careful that you get the ones that are solid aluminium, not hollow tube aluminium. The first step is to mark out a template of the angles and the lengths so that I can use that to check them against as I bend them. So using a metal ruler and the diameters of the 2005 Dalek plans, we can see that the piece is 21cm long. So I mark out a line 21cm, and then the two pieces go off on a 45-degree angle. So I'll use a protractor, set it to 45 degrees. I'll then mark out the lines. In this case, I've done that earlier. So I now have this as a guide so that when I bend the knitting needles, I can make sure they're correct. First of all, we're going to take the heads off the knitting needles, take them off close to the head, just with a hacksaw. That way you still leave the needle as long as possible. So I've marked the straight length onto the cut knitting needle and put it into the vise. I've used a couple of bits of rubber here just to protect the needle so it doesn't get teeth marks from the vise in it. Tighten it up and just gently bend. Get it approximate, and then I'll take it out and I'll check that against the jig. So you can see I lay the gun rod over the jig and it doesn't quite line up here, it needs a little bit more of a bend. So now that side lines up, just check the mark on this side, remark it slightly if I need to, and bend the other end. When you bend in the second end, it's important to make sure it's square so that you're not getting twisted into the rod. Eyeball it. Once you've bent both ends, that lines up approximately. You might have some slight adjustment when you actually come to fit it just to get the angles right. At this stage I haven't cut off the ends, I'll wait until I'm closer to assembling because it just gives you a bit more room to work with. The next step for these will be to, as you can see, they're covered in a grey powder coating or paint. I'm going to try some paint stripper to remove that, and if that doesn't work I'll just have to sand the paint off to get them back to aluminium. So you can see the paint's now dry on our ball for our gun arm. So the next job is to start fitting the gun pieces together. The first piece is the boss, which goes on there. So I want to hold that in place and use a bit of 2-part epoxy glue. Only want a little bit because I don't want to get it everywhere and spread it all over the thing. So I need to carefully apply it just around the edge that will come into contact with the ball. I'm just using a broken nylon bolt. Matchstick or a toothpick or something similar, a nail. It's just what I happen to have available. It dries in about 15 minutes, so once you've mixed it up, you need to get it on there. Slide it into position. Just a bit of a wiggle, hold it firmly in place. So that'll take about 15 minutes to dry. While that's doing that, the other thing I'm going to do at this stage is fit the other tube on the inside while I've still got some more glue here. So what I'm going to do with this This is the handle for the inside of the Dalek. I'm just going to put a bit of glue. Just mixed it up in a lid of a plastic screw container, so I'll just spread it around. And feed it in. Give it a twist. Get the glue spread nicely. Probably going about that far, that's enough of a handle to work with. In and out a couple of times just to spread the epoxy. Give it a wipe, get any excess off. And clean it up with a bit of nail polish remover or acetone layer. And now both of those I'll just leave to dry. Come back in about 15 minutes and we can proceed with the next stage. So 15 minutes later, all nice and dry and nice and tight. So the next stage now is to put the rods on. These are the rods we made earlier out of the 5mm aluminium knitting needles. They were bent to shape. The grey paint or powder coating was then sanded off them. They were then cut to size and they've then been polished with emery board and steel wool. Still got a few scratch marks in them, but I'm never going to get rid of them all probably. So what we're going to do now is we're going to insert these. They go into these holes here and into the holes on this gun boss. I'm not going to fix this gun boss yet because I need to get the movement just right so that the rods fit. Once the rods are all glued in place, they will hold the gun boss in place, and then when I fit the extra tip, I'll be able to put some glue in there which will hold the gun boss in place. So I've got the two-part epoxy again. I'm using it in a dispenser this time because it just makes it a bit easier to put it into the holes. Just gently because I don't want it squirting out in a great rate of knots. So I put a small drop in each hole here. I'm going to do these one at a time now. Small drop in the hole, and a small drop in the hole down here. Put the rod in, get it in snugly. And get it in at both ends. Make sure it's square so the rod's not twisted. And move on to the next one. There we are. Leave that to dry for again for about 15 minutes. Okay, so the rods are set in place now. So the final thing I have to do in this case is put the barrel extension in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'll put a bit of epoxy around the inside. Put the boss in. A few little bits of epoxy, but they'll get cleaned up once it's dry. Thank you. That completes episode 3 of Dalek Diaries. Thanks for joining us.